family vault in St. George's Chapel. I must proceed to Windsor, to calm the anxiety of Clara, who would wait anxiously for us. Yet I would fain spare her the heart-breaking spectacle of Idris, brought in by me lifeless from the journey. So first I would place my beloved beside her child in the vault, and then seek the poor children who would be expecting me. I lighted the lamps of my carriage. I wrapped her in furs and placed her along the seat, then taking the reins made the horses go forward. We proceeded through the snow, which lay in masses impeding the way, while the descending flakes, driving against me with redoubled fury, blinded me. The pain occasioned by the angry elements, and the cold iron of the shafts of frost which buffeted me and entered my aching flesh, were a relief to me, blunting my mental suffering. The horses staggered on, and the reins hung loosely in my hands. I often thought I would lay my head close to the sweet, cold face of my lost angel, and thus resign myself to conquering torpor. Yet I must not leave her prey to the fowls of the air, but in pursuance of my determination place her in the tomb of her forefathers, where a merciful God might permit me to rest also. The road we passed through Egham was familiar to me, but the wind and snow caused the horses to drag their load slowly and heavily. Suddenly the wind veered from southwest to west and then again to northwest. As Samson with tug and strain stirred from their bases the columns that supported the Philistine temple, so did the gale shake the dense vapors propped on the horizon, while the massy dome of clouds fell to the south, disclosing through their scattered web the clear empyrean, and the little stars, which were set at an immeasurable distance in the crystalline fields, showered their small rays on the glittering snow. Even the horses were cheered and moved on with renovated strength. We entered the forest at Bishopgate, and at the end of the long walk I saw the castle, the proud keep of Windsor, rising in the majesty of proportion, girt with the double belt of its kindred and coval towers. I looked with reverence on a structure, ancient almost as the rock on which it stood, abode of kings, theme of admiration for the wise. With greater reverence and tearful affection, I beheld it as the asylum of the long lease of love I had enjoyed there with the perishable, unmatchable treasure of dust which now lay cold beside me. Now indeed I could have yielded to all the softness of my nature, and wept, and woman-like have uttered bitter plaints, while the familiar trees, the herds of living deer, the sward oft pressed by her fairy feet, one by one with sad association presented themselves. The white gate at the end of the long walk was wide open, and I rode up the empty town through the first gate of the feudal tower. And now St. George's Chapel, with its blackened fretted sides, was right before me. I halted at its door, which was open. I entered and placed my lighted lamp on the altar. Then I returned, and with tender caution I bore Idris up the aisle into the chancel, and laid her softly down on the carpet which covered the step leading to the communion table. The banners of the Knights of the Garter and their half-drawn swords were hung in vain emblazonry above the stalls. The banner of her family hung there, still surmounted by its regal crown. Farewell to the glory and heraldry of England. I turned from such vanity with a slight feeling of wonder at how mankind could have ever been interested in such things. I bent over the lifeless corpse of my beloved, and while looking on her uncovered face, the features already contracted by the rigidity of death, I felt as if all the visible universe had grown as soulless, inane, and comfortless as the clay-cold image beneath me. I felt for a moment the intolerable sense of struggle within, and detestation for the laws which govern the world, till the calm still visible on the face of my dead love recalled me to a more soothing tone of mind, and I proceeded to fulfill the last office that could now be paid her. For her I could not lament, so much I envied her enjoyment of the sad immunities of the grave. The vault had been lately opened to place our Alfred therein. The ceremony customary in these later days had been cursorily performed, and the pavement of the chapel, which was its entrance, having been removed, had not been replaced. I descended the steps and walked through the long passage to the large vault which contained the kindred dust of my Idris. I distinguished the small coffin of my babe. With hasty, trembling hands I constructed a bier beside it, spreading it with the furs and Indian shawls which had wrapped Idris in her journey thither. I lighted the glimmering lamp which flickered in this damp abode of the dead, then I bore my lost one to her last bed, decently composing her limbs and covering them with a mantle, veiling all except her face, which remained lovely and placid. She appeared to rest like one overwearied, her beauteous eyes steeped in sweet slumber. Yet so it was not, she was dead. How intensely I then longed to lie down beside her, to gaze till death should gather me to the same repose. But death does not come at the bidding of the miserable. I had lately recovered from mortal illness, and my blood had never flowed with such an even current, nor had my limbs ever been so instinct with quick life as now. I felt that my death must be voluntary. Yet what more natural than famine, as I watched in this chamber of mortality, placed in a world of the dead, beside the lost hope of my life. Meanwhile, as I looked on her, the features which bore a sisterly resemblance to Adrian brought my thoughts back again to the living, to this dear friend, to Clara and to Evelyn, who were probably now in Windsor, waiting anxiously for our arrival. Methought I heard a noise, a step in the far chapel, which was re-echoed by its vaulted roof, and borne to me through the hollow passages. Had Clara seen my carriage pass up the town, and did she seek me here? I must save her at least from the horrible scene the vault presented. I sprung up the steps, and then saw a female figure bent with age, and clad in long mourning robes, advance through the dusky chapel, supported by a slender cane, yet tottering even with this support. She heard me, and looked up. The lamp I held illuminated my figure, and the moonbeams, struggling through the painted glass, fell upon her face, wrinkled and gaunt, yet with a piercing eye and commanding brow. I recognized the Countess of Windsor. With a hollow voice she asked, "Where is the princess?" I pointed to the torn-up pavement. She walked to the spot and looked down into the palpable darkness, for the vault was too distant for the rays of the small lamp I had left there to be discernible. "Your light," she said. I gave it her, and she regarded the now visible but precipitous steps, as if calculating her capacity to descend. Instinctively I made a silent offer of my assistance. She motioned me away with a look of scorn, saying in a harsh voice as she pointed downwards, "There at least I may have her undisturbed." She walked deliberately down, while I, overcome, miserable beyond words or tears or groans, threw myself on the pavement near. The stiffening form of Idris was before me, the death-struck countenance hushed in eternal repose beneath. That was to me the end of all. The day before I had figured to myself various adventures, and communion with my friends in after-time. Now I had leapt the interval, and reached the utmost edge and bourne of life. Thus wrapped in gloom, enclosed, walled up, vaulted over by the omnipotent present, I was startled by the sound of feet on the steps of the tomb, and I remembered her whom I had utterly forgotten, my angry visitant. Her tall form slowly rose upwards from the vault, a living statue, instinct with hate and human, passionate strife. She seemed to me as having reached the pavement of the aisle. She stood motionless, seeking with her eyes alone some desired object, till, perceiving me close to her, she placed her wrinkled hand on my arm, exclaiming with tremulous accents, "Lionel Verney, my son." This name, applied at such a moment by my angel's mother, instilled into me more respect than I had ever before felt for this disdainful lady. I bowed my head and kissed her shriveled hand, and remarking that she trembled violently, supported her to the end of the chancel, where she sat on the steps that led to the regal stall. She suffered herself to be led, and still holding my hand, she leaned her head back against the stall, while the moonbeams, tinged with various colors by the painted glass, fell on her glistening eyes. Aware of her weakness, again calling to mind her long-cherished dignity, she dashed the tears away, yet they fell fast as she said, for excuse, "She is so beautiful and placid even in death. No harsh feeling ever clouded her serene brow. How did I treat her, wounding her gentle heart with savage coldness? I had no compassion on her in past years. Does she forgive me now? Little, little does it boot to talk of repentance and forgiveness to the dead. Had I during her life once consulted her gentle wishes, and curbed my rugged nature to do her pleasure, I should not feel thus." Idris and her mother were unlike in person. The dark hair, deep-set black eyes, and prominent features of the ex-queen were in entire contrast to the golden tresses, the full blue orbs, and the soft lines and contour of her daughter's countenance. Yet in later days, illness had taken from my poor girl the full outline of her face, and reduced it to the inflexible shape of the bone beneath. in the form of her brow and her oval chin, there was to